The year is 1944. The skies over Europe belonged to the Luftwaffe. For years, their pilots, the elite, had reigned supreme. Masters of their craft, they were a breed apart, the Wehrmacht's aerial knights. This was their domain, and they ruled it with ruthless efficiency. But their reign was about to end. The skies over Germany. But the tide was turning. The war, once a dance of maneuver and skill, was becoming a war of attrition, a war of numbers. The very air itself was about to change. From the west and the east, the Allied onslaught intensified. The Reich was under siege, its industrial heartland laid bare to the relentless hammer blows from the skies. Day and night, the bombers came, and with them, the promise of utter destruction. Inside the High Command, the air was thick with desperation. They knew the danger, but they clung to a desperate hope. Their aces, the veterans, the pilots with hundreds of kills to their names, they could still turn the tide. Their skill, their experience, they believed, would be enough. They miscalculated. They underestimated the enemy's resources. They failed to grasp the scale of the industrial war. The Allies had something the Luftwaffe could not match: mass production. And with it, they could churn out aircraft at a rate the Germans could barely comprehend. Across the Atlantic and across the British Isles, a silent revolution was underway. Factories, vast and humming, were converted to the purpose of war. Aircraft, by the thousands, took shape. The Allies were building an air force that dwarfed anything the world had ever seen. The aces began to notice. The veteran pilots, men who had flown through hell and back, saw the numbers. They saw the sheer weight of metal, the endless waves of steel and fire. The odds were shifting, the battlefield was changing. Enter the American P-51 Mustang, a sleek, deadly machine, outmatching the best the Luftwaffe could muster. The skies were filling with these fighters, escorting the bombers deeper and deeper into the heart of Germany. Even the best could only do so much. The Luftwaffe's aces, men like Erich Hartmann, continued to rack up victories, but they were fighting a losing battle. Each victory was bittersweet, a temporary reprieve against an inevitable tide. They were outnumbered, and the quality of their opponents was rising. New pilots emerged from training, not always the best, but in numbers that the Luftwaffe could not match. The war had become a different beast, a war of attrition, a war that the aces, with all their skill, could not win. The fall of the Luftwaffe had begun. The Allied bombing campaign intensified, a strategic hammer blow against the Reich. Factories, oil refineries, and transportation hubs were targeted. Each raid, a step closer to the inevitable collapse. Deep within Germany, factories strained under the weight of war. Production struggled to keep pace with the mounting losses. Spare parts became a luxury, maintenance a constant battle against time and attrition. The Luftwaffe's elite, the aces, were stretched thin. They fought multiple engagements daily, their skills and courage tested beyond human endurance. The odds, however, were steadily shifting. The war of attrition had begun. Across the Channel, Allied pilots learned. They exploited the superior performance of their aircraft. They perfected new tactics, learned how to outmaneuver the German fighters. The tide was turning. German pilots, forced to intercept massive formations of Allied bombers, found themselves facing an impossible task. Their aircraft, though formidable, were overwhelmed. The skies became their graveyard. The Battle of the Bulge, a last, desperate gamble. The Luftwaffe attempted a final push, a desperate attempt to regain control of the skies. It was a fleeting, doomed illusion. Fuel, the lifeblood of any air force, became increasingly scarce. The Luftwaffe's supply lines were choked. Every mission was a gamble, every sortie a risk of running dry before reaching home. Allied radar systems improved, providing early warning of German attacks. The element of surprise, once a key advantage for the Luftwaffe, was lost. They were now constantly under surveillance. On the ground, maintenance crews struggled to keep the aging aircraft flying. The relentless war had taken its toll. The machines, like the men who flew them, were pushed to the breaking point. The Luftwaffe's fate was sealed. In the skies above Europe, a new breed of predator emerged. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a brute of a fighter, bristling with machine guns and capable of absorbing incredible punishment. Its arrival signaled a turning tide. The vaunted aces of the Luftwaffe, once masters of the aerial battlefield, now found themselves facing a relentless onslaught. Their skill, once the defining factor, was slowly becoming irrelevant in the face of superior numbers and overwhelming force. The Allied pilots, seasoned by the battles over North Africa and the Eastern Front, honed their tactics. Their experience grew with each sortie, each encounter. They learned to hunt, to exploit, to dominate. The Luftwaffe bled. Attrition, a silent killer, began to take its toll. The experienced pilots, the backbone of the Air Force, were dying faster than replacements could be trained. The aerial elite was being decimated. With the skies increasingly clear, the Allied bombers began their relentless campaign. Unimpeded, they flew deeper into Germany, bringing fire and destruction to the heart of the Reich. The war was coming home. The remaining German pilots were forced to fight a desperate defensive war. Tasked with protecting their homeland, they faced the enemy knowing the odds were stacked against them. Their roles were reversed, now the hunted, not the hunters. The fuel shortage crippled the Luftwaffe. Training sorties were curtailed. Combat missions were rationed. The lifeblood of the Air Force, the fuel that powered its machines and its ambitions, was fast running dry. Allied fighter sweeps systematically targeted and destroyed Luftwaffe airfields. Planes were wrecked on the ground, pilots killed before they could even take flight. The airfields, once strategic assets, were now death traps. The Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, finally took to the skies. But it was too late. Too few, too late. The tide had turned, and the future was already lost. The German pilots, now facing superior numbers and superior airframes, fought on with unwavering courage. But in the face of relentless mass production, skill alone was no longer enough. The fall of the Luftwaffe had begun, an inevitable consequence of a war it could no longer win. But the German eagles were grounded. Fuel became a precious commodity, rationed with ruthless efficiency. Sorties were curtailed, missions cancelled. The skies, once theirs, were slipping away. Across the Atlantic, a different story unfolded. American and British factories roared to life, a testament to industrial power. Aircraft rolled off the assembly lines in unprecedented numbers. Replacements were plentiful, losses easily absorbed. The elite of the Luftwaffe, the aces, fought with skill and valor. But skill alone was not enough. They fell, one by one, their experience lost in the relentless attrition. Their prowess could not outpace the relentless machinery of war. The tide had turned. The skies above occupied Europe belonged to the Allies. Their fighters ruled, unchallenged, their presence a constant reminder of German vulnerability. The balance of power was shifting irrevocably. The Luftwaffe's training programs struggled to keep pace. Replacing the fallen was a relentless race. Young pilots were rushed through instruction, often ill-prepared for the brutal realities of combat. Their fate was almost predetermined. The confidence of the Allied pilots soared. They pressed their advantage, their attacks becoming bolder, more aggressive. The fear in the air was palpable, but not for them. Morale within Germany began to fracture. The relentless pressure, the constant air raids, the unyielding loss. These things took their toll. The cracks in the facade of defiance were becoming ever wider. Allied fighters struck relentlessly at German airfields. Aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Maintenance facilities were crippled, and the Luftwaffe's ability to respond was eroded. The hammer had fallen. The Allied air armada swelled. Day after day, the skies darkened with the shadows of hundreds of bombers, each laden with destruction. The scale was unprecedented, a force the Luftwaffe could no longer hope to contain. The elite, the aces, the men who had once dominated the aerial battlefield were falling. Their losses, however, were not replaced by veterans. Instead, the ranks were filled with inexperienced recruits, thrust into a war they were ill-equipped to fight. The German fighter pilots, once the aggressors, were now reduced to defense. They launched their outdated machines into the fray, knowing the odds were stacked against them, facing an enemy that held all the cards. The Allied supply lines grew stronger, more resilient. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, everything flowed towards the front lines, feeding the relentless war machine. The Allies were able to sustain their campaigns with ease. Meanwhile, German war production was crippled. Supply chain disruptions, caused by relentless bombing and material shortages, crippled the ability to replace losses. The Luftwaffe's wings were slowly being clipped. As the war ground on, Allied pilots gained experience, honing their skills and tactics. Their confidence soared, their proficiency grew, their victories became more frequent. The sky belonged to them. The German High Command faced a grim reality. They had to deal with a losing air war, their choices growing fewer, their options dwindling. The end was coming, and they knew it. The Allied raids on German cities became more and more devastating. The Luftwaffe, once a symbol of German military prowess, had been outmatched. The fall of the Luftwaffe foreshadowed the fall of the Reich itself. They were the elite, the Jagdflieger, aces of the Luftwaffe, masters of the sky. But in 1944, their skills were becoming a liability, their victories bought at an unbearable price. Every fallen ace was a wound that would not heal. Their experience, their knowledge, lost forever. The losses were irreplaceable. The relentless air war took its toll. Damaged aircraft returned, battered and broken. German mechanics, already stretched thin, struggled to keep pace. Resources were dwindling, materials were scarce. The supply chain, choked by Allied bombing, was failing. The ability to repair and return aircraft to the fight was collapsing. The sky above the battlefield belonged to the Allies. Fighter bombers rained down destruction on German ground forces, cutting supply lines, disrupting troop movements, and destroying vital infrastructure. The offensive was relentless. The ground forces were under constant attack. Morale within the Luftwaffe crumbled. The reality of the situation became clear. The war was lost in the air. The vaunted aces, once symbols of invincibility, were now shadows of their former selves, haunted by the ghosts of comrades lost and the knowledge of impending defeat. The spirit of the Luftwaffe was broken. The skies over Germany belonged to the Allies. Bombing formations, vast and seemingly invincible, roamed freely. Cities, factories and railways were systematically targeted, bleeding the Reich dry. The German aces, the elite of the Luftwaffe, took to the skies, fighting with courage and skill. They were masters of aerial combat, but skill alone was not enough. They faced an unending tide of steel, a relentless onslaught from above. The skill of the individual pilot, the bravery of the men, could not change the inevitable. The Luftwaffe's fate was sealed by the sheer weight of Allied industry, the overwhelming power of mass production. From the North Sea to the Mediterranean, the Allied presence was absolute. The skies of Europe, once contested, were now a testament to the power of the Allies. The fall of the Luftwaffe was complete, the war nearing its bloody end. Mass production had won the war in the air. The swift accumulation of aircraft, the unyielding supply of fuel, the endless stream of pilots. It was this, not individual brilliance, that sealed the fate of the Luftwaffe. This, the final nail in the coffin of the Third Reich.